It's funny that so many parents and coaches are like, yes, specialize, specialize, specialize. And then you look at the most elite of elite athletes out there. All of them have interest outside of their sport.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of 80% Mental, the number one podcast in the entire universe around sport and performance and health and well-being and the psychology underpinning all of those things. This series, we're diving into the psychology of exercise and well-being and health a little bit more. And we've got Leah Washington here. Leah, how are you doing?
I'm great, bestie. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad because it's a reasonable time for you, this one as well, isn't it?
I know, it's so nice in the afternoons instead of like as early.
Meanwhile, I am almost falling asleep because it's late here. Anyway, on today's episode, we're going to dive into a topic that we've kind of mentioned it before a few times, but we haven't really gone into much depth. And that is the role of identity in sport and exercise. Why is identity important? How is it related to performance? And how is it related to well-being? And we're hoping to dig into that a little bit more in this episode. And we've got the perfect guest for this topic joining us today. So it is my pleasure to introduce Aren Ulmer to the podcast. Aren, how are you doing today?
P, I'm doing great. Like I said, very excited to be here. Looking forward to having these conversations and just expanding the knowledge to everyone about these really important topics.
Cool, fantastic. Well, I ran into Aren. What was it? Maybe 2-3 years ago now. At one of the APS conferences. We kind of got talking. So it's a real pleasure to have you here on the podcast. Just by way of introduction, for people who don't know, Aren is a really highly skilled sports psychology professional, dedicated to enhancing performance, mental resilience, and overall well-being. And Aren specializes in the holistic development of athletes, so integrating evidence-based psychological strategies with his own lived experience as a former collegiate athlete and coach. So, Aren, you're currently a doctoral candidate, is that right, at the University of Arizona?
Yeah, I'm beginning that dissertation process. The way things are going, it should be done. But the expectation is to be done in less than a year. Yeah. But the goal is to get done by December and add that title.
And you're already a certified mental performance consultant. Tell us a little bit about some of the work that you're doing at the minute. So you're working with NCAA athletes and doing some stuff outside of sport as well. Is that right?
So right now, a big thing I'm working with Cortex Performance is a lot of professional athletes, actually. But it's an interesting group of professional athletes who are American playing overseas. Okay. So dealing kind of with that holistic development and dealing with wellness and performance and all of those things, that group of athletes who are away from home for 10 months. But then also, like you mentioned, NCAA athletes, G League athletes, but then also with IMG working with youth athletes, my youngest being 9 all the way to 17 within that age range. Really diverse sporting group with them, but the kind of primary full-time facing is working with that basketball culture through Cortex.
Cool. And I guess that sort of age range of 9 to 17, that's like a really important time for identity development, right? So really looking forward to getting into some of that. Before we start though, can you just tell us a little bit about you? Because you were a collegiate athlete as well, right? You played basketball.
I did. So I'm originally from Bay Area, California, and when it was about 2015, graduated there, ended up moving to Georgia, Carrollton, Georgia. It's about an hour outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and that's where my college basketball career began. I would say I learned a lot from that collegiate experience, the highs, the absolute lows that come with it. I think a lot of that shaped me to who I am today and kind of the work I do within this field. I was able to win a conference championship while I was there, but then also have a 10-win season while I was there. Multiple head coaches. And I always keep this stat very close to me that I had 42 different teammates in a span of 4 years. For anyone that knows basketball, that's honestly absurd. So there's a lot that went into that. And I think that's why this topic is so important, because I really think a lot of those experiences really shaped my own personal identity and how I come across as the person I am, the practitioner I am, just the human that I am. So then after that, graduated, moved back to California, where I was in a completely different field. I wasn't directly in that sports psych space. I was working in sports business and strategic partnerships with collegiate sports. Then 2020 happens. Everybody knows what happens in 2020. And that allowed me to really pivot my career and pivot my experiences and go back to school and do something that I was really passionate about. And that's where sports psych came along. And I was able to pair that up with coaching collegiate basketball. So being able to learn about our field by first-handedly seeing kind of all these concepts come to life and working directly with athletes as learning this knowledge, that made just the authenticity of this field really start to develop for myself. Graduated 2022 from Holy Names University with Dr. Allison Pope Rodius. It was a fantastic program, got me really ready for this field. And I was really able to step into it because I had the experiences as a player, as a coach. Internship and CNPC hours were done. So that really allowed me to really just step into the game and take off. And since then, that was, like I said, 2022. And since then, it's been a blessing for all the experiences and opportunities that I've had to work with, whether it's developing mindfulness curriculum with the Golden State Warriors Community Foundation, to working with professional athletes and collegiate athletes and international players. So all of that's kind of what the last 10 years has really looked like for me. Like I said, there's highs, there's lows, but all of that has really helped shape me to kind of where I am and, more importantly, who I am.
In what ways has it shaped you, do you think? You know, you mentioned that kind of your own identity formation was kind of influenced by those experiences. Like, can you give us some examples? Can you like expand on that a little bit? I'm just curious.
For sure. So like I had mentioned, having 42 different teammates in 4 years.
Yeah.
I constantly, exactly. Look, we had a lot of seniors freshman year, sophomore year. I was the only returner to come back junior year, then a new head coach senior year. So with all those changes, it leads to a lot of teammates. But within those 4 years, I constantly felt like I had to be somebody else. I had to be the individual who knew the campus, who knew how the university worked. I never could develop like multi-year relationships with individuals. Like there's very few, I think like 4 or 5 maybe, that were there for more than 1 year, but that was it. So that started to change. I went through my own kind of mental health struggles my sophomore year, just being away from home, and a lot of things were happening back home at that time as well. So then that starts to shift your identity a little bit, and you start to question, okay, am I really who I say that I am? Am I who I really want to be? And I think there was a time period where I was just this ever shifting like puzzle piece. Like wherever I needed to fit, I can make my identity fit that aspect rather than having the things around me conform to who I was. So going through that and then changing careers and kind of fitting in those pieces, it's kind of all evolved to, I honestly would say like now in the last 6, 7 months, I'll say closer to the last year, to where I've kind of really put that behind me. And I'm just like, I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to do the things the way I want to do it. I'm going to portray the image that I want to be portrayed. And that's going to attract who it needs to attract. If it pushes back some people that might not like it, that's fine with me. And I'm not going to be apologetic about it. And that's kind of been my hashtag this year, is unapologetic, because I got really tired of just conforming who I was to all the situations that were happening around me, versus kind of just being who I was, standing strong in that, and then letting that be the creator of everything that was happening in my life.
I think you see that often with like, as people develop as people, as like human beings, right? That like it shifts from trying to be who other people want us to be, or who we perceive other people want us to be, to being like, I can't be all these different people. And how can we form a unified vision of ourselves, right? If I'm like this person over here and I'm this person over here, how can we integrate that, right? And so that it's all one person. And so I'm curious of like, when you talk about holistic development and looking at all of these different selves, how do you envision that development to go, with each athlete, especially with such a wide, I've had really young athletes too, and professional athletes from all across the age range. And it can be really challenged to shift between like where they are developmentally. So how do you envision this holistic development with all of these different disparate groups?
I mean, I think oftentimes in our field, we really get stuck on the aspect of performance and just, can I get from A to point B? And then it's stopping at that. But in reality, there's so much more to it. And as the landscape of sports continue to change, we run into now athletes being more of a brand or a business, but there's more to it. So when we're addressing athletes as like that whole person rather than like focusing on their physical performance, we're looking at their mental, their emotional, their social, sometimes even spiritual. I know that can be a finicky line to sometimes teeter, but I think it's still important because that there's an influence to that onto performance. But I think importantly we look at that overall quality of life, and even the younger athletes is really getting into the things that they admire, the things that drives them, and finding ways to enhance that. So, like for example, I have a current athlete who's in that battle between, I want to have this on field like personality, but it doesn't match who I am off the field. And my question to him is like, why does it have to be the same? Right? Like sometimes we can pull different strings to that. So let's use his creativity. He likes to draw. He loves to draw animated characters from movies. So he's a big Venom fan. So why not create an image of Venom that you can now portray as yourself on the field and just be that? Let that take over. So then when you step off the field, you can be yourself. But now I've allowed him to step outside of his performance self, get into the things that he enjoys to find a way to bridge the two between that. And then on the other side, they're dealing with school, they're dealing with parents and relationships and siblings. And I think once we get to that space where we can really allow athletes to trust us, to open up, to be vulnerable and not be judged, we can find ways to impact it, because all of these skills are transferable. When I can build your confidence through self-talk in your sport, we can do the same way if you're having problems speaking to your coach, speaking to parents or teammates or things like that. So I think when I go to a holistic approach, those are the types of things I'm looking at. Can we help build relationships? Can we help you be a leader? Can I give you more confidence or more focus to do the things that you need to do? Maybe preparation is the biggest thing. And that's something that a lot of youth athletes don't understand the value of it. Are you sleeping the right way? Are you taking care of your priorities? Or are you deciding just to show up? And now you're confused why there's no consistency.
Yeah.
It's like
I literally had this conversation with an athlete like the other day. Of, like, she's in high school and she's very highly achieving, and like she was like telling me about her day, and I was like, do you eat lunch? And she was like, oh no, I don't have a lunch period because I want to leave early so I can go to practice. And I was like, so the fatigue is making a lot more sense now. If you're like all of those things, like you said, it's like, are you just that basic boring stuff of like taking care of your body? And the number of times that I've had athletes where I'm like, I feel so much better. And I'm like, yeah, that's not a mystery.
Exactly. I mean, it prioritizes just long-term growth. I think sometimes we stick into this solution-based approach where we stay right in the immediate performance of like, how can I get better from today to tomorrow? When in reality, there's so much more than that. So if we can look at that holistic development side, and we can really just help athletes focus on the development pieces that go beyond performance, I think it starts to create more well-rounded athletes who are not only resilient in their sport, but also resilient and can cope with challenges that occur on and off of the court or field or whatever sport it might be. And I honestly believe, and there's research out there that proves it, that it helps athletes reach their full potential when you address these areas of development. And sometimes it's all about just knowledge and education and getting them to that fork in the road where they have to make the decision. Like I always tell my athletes, I'm never going to make a decision for you. You can choose to do whatever you want to do, but I'm going to push you and guide you to that fork in the road where you can either A, prepare the way you know you need to prepare that has shown you that performance is good, or choose route B and being consistent about it. And I think sometimes that's what we have to do. We just guide them to making that decision. And if they can reach that decision point, whether it's in sport, school, life, relationship, whatever it is, I think that's our win. That's our win in helping them get to a point where it's like, all right, I know option A and option B. I just have to choose which one.
Yeah, I love the idea that all of these skills and all of these things that we're teaching them in sport are just transferable to the rest of their lives as well. And I love that question that you asked as well about why do these aspects of your identity and your athletic identity have to be different? Why do they have to be separate? Like they don't have to be separate. We can integrate that stuff. So I kind of love that question. We'll take a short break and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more. We're not really going to take a break. I'm just going to put a little break in afterwards.
I figured.
This is the 80% Mental Podcast. I'm here with Leah Washington, as always, and we are joined by Aren Ulmer, certified mental performance consultant, and we are talking about identity and the importance of identity in sport and beyond. Aren, I wanted to ask you about something that's kind of it's played on my mind a lot, and this is the idea that there's so much focus at the moment, particularly with social media and athletes putting their highlight reels on social media, and you can't go anywhere without seeing the latest 2-year-old who's going to be the next LeBron James, right? But there's so much focus on dedication to the craft and spending hours in the gym, and I use the Mamba mentality as a prime example of this. But you're saying that having a focus on things outside of sport is actually important, but that might be counterintuitive to a lot of parents and even a lot of coaches who like fully buying into this whole, no, you got to be dedicated to sport and nothing else. So why is it so important to develop those kind of multiple aspects to our identity? Like, why is it such an important, how can we convince people who are buying into this performance narrative that actually it's such an important thing to do?
I mean, I think it's hard to convince individuals of it, but I think the best thing we can do is continue to educate them and build awareness. And I think, like I mentioned before the break, like guiding people to that fork in the road or whatever that might be. I think it's important for athletes to kind of branch out from just that individual sport, because it creates that broader sense of self-worth and that sense of resilience and preparing them for life even after sport. I think that was a challenge personally for me when we talk about how my experiences guide me as to the way I work. Once I finished playing college basketball, I had no idea who I was because everything was so focused on basketball. And this is coming from someone who played every sport growing up, like volleyball, soccer, martial arts, baseball, football, all sports growing up. And then once I even started specializing like junior year of high school, throughout the next 7 years, it was nothing but basketball. And I think it put me in a spot where after the fact, I was like, so what now? Who am I now? And I think now when we allow these athletes to branch out and explore their creativities, their interests and things like that, I think in the long run, it helps them. And it's funny that so many parents and coaches are like, yes, specialize, specialize, specialize. And then you look at the most elite of elite athletes out there, and all of them have interest outside of their sport.
Yeah.
Miles Turner with the Indiana Pacers is a huge Lego fanatic. Like it can be
I love that.
simple, right? We see LeBron's played multiple sports. Steph Curry played multiple sports. Like all of the most elite athletes have played multiple sports, have other interests, because there is time where you have to shut that brain off from sport and allow yourself to be somebody else. So I think the way we have to do it is, like I said, the education and awareness, whether it's not just working with athletes, but working with that entire ecosystem, having workshops, having panels with these elite athletes and certified licensed sports psychology practitioners, mental performance consultants, whoever it might be, to educate them on what this holistic approach looks like and how we can focus on, those life skills that are gained through diverse activities and celebrate achievements outside of sports, bring evidence into it, and honestly paint a picture of like, look, it's great. You can still maximize your potential. You can still get up every single day at 6 a.m. and go to the gym and work out. I'm not saying take that away, but 24/7, your mind doesn't need to be locked on just that one thing. Is there a 2-hour gap where you can go build some Legos? I don't know. As simple as that. But I think our role can help encourage these athletes to find that space, whatever it might be. I have a really good friend whose goal and dream is to build this facility where student athletes can come, they get mental performance training, and that turns into credit for them to use for anything that they want, whether it's making a beat, making music, writing a song, art, something, but it's using what we do and showing them that it's okay to use these other avenues, because there are ways that we can pull that into your sport. Is there a certain beat or song that you like that we can use as a focus cue to control your emotional regulation? And we will never know that if we're just like basketball, or soccer, football, whatever it might be. So I think there's that space in order for us to really educate and really push that knowledge that there is mental health benefits. There's easier transitions in and out of your career. There's improved performance. There's personal growth and fulfillment. There's combating that identity imbalance, right? We can find ways to pull them together. They don't have to be so specialized in just one area. And it's amazing that when people use the mama mentality, that's what kind of gets stuck in. It's like, okay, that just means I have to fully embrace this.
Yeah.
But if people actually have like explored Kobe Bryant and what he done, that's just one part of it, right? He loved women's basketball. He was invested in soccer. He invested in all this other stuff that made him him. But that mama mentality was just a piece of him. People have now taken that and like, I need to make my entire identity just that.
Yeah.
In reality, you can have multiple pieces within the same body.
I find it so interesting because like when we look at, interviews like with athletes or whatever, and they're like, you play the piano? And it's like they're an alien. Like, and I'm like, yeah, they're a highly achieving person. Like maybe they have more than one thing, or like,
Exactly.
I was thinking about what you were talking about, having like these outside interests, and Jordan Poole with the Washington Wizards, and he's like a huge cat person, and he does this whole thing with like cat rescue and like all these cat dads in the NBA and like all this stuff. And it was like this whole article in the Washington Post, this like newspaper, and I was like, do you think that they're robots? Like we always have this like conversations of like, oh, athletes aren't robots, but then when we're faced with like a non-robot like facet of their life, then we're like mind blown, like, oh my God, can you believe that they have a personality? It's like, come on, guys.
So, but I think with these perhaps younger athletes, what you're saying there, Aren, is just even just providing them with opportunities to show that they're interested in other things. You don't necessarily have to kind of push them to do it, but just giving them the opportunities to express themselves in different ways other than sport.
In 2024, I had a chance to work at an MLS academy. So that was with Atlanta United, from U12 to their second pro team. I was overseeing all the mental performance things there. And one thing that really got implemented, or we were starting to implement before things changed, was having a day where other sports were brought into training.
Yeah.
Whether it was basketball, football, baseball, it was another sport day for these kids to still get conditioning, get fitness, whatever it is, but it's sometimes just pulling other aspects into it. Can we bring a video game system on the road and create that as an activation for mental and physical recovery? We did that, and we saw drastic changes in performance going into that next tournament. So it's little things like that. Like, I'm not saying like take this full direction away and just make your sport 25% and 75% focus on other things. What's the 5% that we can drag into this? And it can be something so little like exploring video games. I think Arsenal, their mental performance coach, did something I thought was so cool. He took a Fortnite map and put all different types of emotions on it, put it up in their academy facility, and allowed that to be the check-in for their athletes. So we knew at the time all kids were loving Fortnite. So they all knew what it was. So again, that's finding ways to bridge interest in something outside of their sport, blending with mental performance to seeing a better performance outcome. Those
I'm
are the
too
little
old.
things.
I don't know what Fortnite is. I'm too old to understand Fortnite.
Even I know what Fortnite is.
No, I know what it is. I just
not that I.
But it's little stuff like that. It's really fascinating on how little of changes organizations, teams, parents, athletes can make that can really have all these different touch points to normalize emotions, to find a space to just articulate just simply how we're feeling or how to take a step away mentally and not be so drawn down from maybe a bad performance. Because we've all had bad performances. How do we have to bounce back? Find ways to evaluate it and find ways to move on. We talk about that in acceptance commitment theory all the time.
Yeah.
We have to find ways to do it, and we have to find ways that make sense from an individualized perspective.
I think it's also super limiting for athletes themselves to, they're like, I am a basketball player. And so when you present them with something more creative, then they're like, oh, I don't think I can do this. I don't know. And it's like, you're super creative on the court every single day. Let's take advantage of that. And I think that sometimes, like you said earlier, that athletes don't always recognize their own strengths that they have in their sport and how they can translate those to other parts of their life or how they can expand that in other areas of their life. So how do you kind of like work with athletes to build on those strengths?
I think first step is identifying them and figuring out simply what they are. So it's looking at listing out, hey, what are some of the things that you feel you do well, right? And then starting that evaluation process and getting the chance to kind of take an outside picture and looking in. I've done some activities where I've had them watch their own film as if they were a scout and write down the things they see that themselves doing well. And it's like, okay, let's find the consistencies in that, whether it's being creative, whether it's using your strength or finesse or whatever it might be. I think really articulating that, finding ways to journal that, finding ways to just, like I said, be creative behind all things. I think that's the most exciting part of this field for me, is finding ways to be creative and almost disguise the mental performance aspect behind things. Because the younger they are, you have to be more creative or else you're going to lose them. They're going to be like, all right, we're talking too scientific, and we're talking too much self-talk, like all these words. But if I can find ways to disguise it in a chance, we'll get them to identify what their strengths are and then continue to play into those. I think sometimes when we get lost in the world of, performance and having these ups and downs, sometimes a simple solution is just get back to what you do really well. Mm-hmm. What are those 1, 2, or 3 things that no one can take away from you? Apply those. Go do that, right? When we talk about creating these core values, what simple behaviors and actions can you commit to because you know that they're your strengths over and over and over and over again? And you find that baseline of consistency. Because if you know you can do these 5 things and that gives you a good performance and that's now your baseline, everything above that is now a great performance. But we'll never get below that line because we've identified the things that you've done well and you can commit to doing just those. And I think you can do that from 9 all the way up to being a professional athlete because those things will, quite frankly, they just never go away. So I think when we find those strengths, I think that's a place where it could really allow us to build on those.
Yeah, I like to have my athletes make a highlight reel of themselves. But like I propose it of like make a highlight reel of a teammate, but use like all your footage. If they were making a highlight reel of a teammate, they would put like everything in it, but they become super judgy about like what their own stuff is. They're like, oh, that's not good enough to include. So I kind of like have them pretend to be like their own like teammate and say like, just you just have to use like all your stuff, but you're making it for somebody else, like totally. And then to use that as like a reminder of like, you have these strengths, you are good, you do deserve to be here. And it's kind of like, it becomes like their own like hype video.
I'm interested in collegiate athletes in particular. So kind of moving up an age group, essentially. Thinking about collegiate athletes, most collegiate athletes aren't going to turn pro. They're just a numbers game, right? So I wonder how athletes manage that duality, that sort of dual identity of being an athlete, maybe on scholarship, whatever, but also being a scholar. And I wonder, maybe kind of, can you give us sort of your experience of that through the college system? But also, is there any work that you do in and around that with collegiate athletes? Anything sort of different to the things you've already talked about?
Well, the whole college athlete landscape is now changing so fast.
Well, absolutely.
Even my own work, I feel like in the last 2 years, completely changing. Depending on the sport, whether it's football, that's a different world in itself. Basketball, it's because now you're not talking about just being an athlete trying to go pro or a student. You're now also talking about how can I maximize the most amount of money within this amount of time. So those are just, now it's how do I just stay focused? How do I stay focused and concentrated on the task at hand?
Yeah.
What I've learned or even just my experience, what's been best working with them is really, really teaching them on how to stay present and live in the moment. Because with transfer portals, NILs, short time span before going pro, when we get so caught up in that nature, we miss out on all the little things that are happening right now. And we can't maximize ourselves for the future if we're not present here. So I think it starts to shift a little bit. It's, okay, let's stick to these things that are our strengths. And it goes back to like when I was a player, that identity of like, I need to fit in all of these different places versus being myself and allowing someone to put me, who I am, to fit within their system. And I think a lot of players get lost in that, and they will continue to with the rate that players are now transferring. Because now we see players who are, and this is almost all sports, it's going to be very rare you're going to find 4-year players in college sports anymore. Like, it's going to be extremely rare to see someone at one school for 4 years. So now this is where finding your strengths are going to be extremely valuable, because you're going to have to try and find ways to still be consistent with an entirely new system, school, budget, teammates, whatever that might be. And then finding ways to translate it to being a pro. That's a whole story in itself. And that's something that personally that I want to start working on, is almost building that transition program from high school to college, from college to pro, from a performance standpoint of, hey, how can we build on the holistic things? But also, how can we bring who you were at your peak to now the next level where you're not at your peak anymore? Every college team was everybody's high school's best player. Every pro team was every college's best player.
Yeah.
How do you still continue to find ways to maximize yourself, to, maximize your potential and performance with all of the external distractions going on? And I think that's what's huge now, is as all these external distractions continue to rise, whether it's relationships, school, money, all of those things, let's get back to being present. Let's control the things that we can control. Let's be organized in our preparation, our in-game, our post-game, our daily mental skills, and let the rest just kind of happen, right? Because if we can take control of and take care of everything within ourselves and in that silo and being here, like I mentioned, those transferable skills start to kick in. And now you realize you're handling a lot of these things subconsciously. And you're not having to put this pressure on yourself to handle them. And they feel like more they're starting to handle themselves, because you're now a lot more prepared for all these different situations that are kind of arising.
This is the 80% Mental podcast. I'm here with Aren Ulmer and Leah Washington. If you're enjoying what you're listening to, don't forget you can subscribe at 80percentmental.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at EPM Podcast or Instagram at 80%Mental. We've been talking a lot about development of identity through youth systems, through youth sport, into college, and managing those sort of dual roles as a collegiate athlete. I think we've talked a lot about some of the issues of over-identifying as an athlete, or even as a coach, because coaches do this too. What we're really talking about is this idea of identity foreclosure, right? So if our identity is tied up entirely in being an athlete or a coach, and that isn't necessarily going very well, then our whole identity kind of suddenly collapses and we have nothing left, right? So this is the sort of benefits of having multiple aspects to our identity, multiple parts to the self. Is there an argument to say that actually having a really strong athletic identity is also important? Because we've kind of been tearing it down a little bit here, saying, you need to have lots of other things in your life. You need to be doing this, you need to be doing that, you need to kind of have multiple strings to your bow. But is there an argument to say that actually we should also really have a really, really strong athletic identity? That's something that's needed for performance as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Like you said, it's tough after we've sat here now for some time tearing it down to just go back and be like, no, yeah, actually part of it might be beneficial,
I know. I just wondered what your thoughts were.
I think it's almost how you word it in a sense. All right. I think there's a public identity and then there's also an internal identity.
Right.
And I'm not saying your public identity has to be, like we mentioned with Jordan Poole, he doesn't have to be the cat guy in the NBA, right? He can be the basketball player who's grinded throughout his years, Alen Ulmer, to his college career in Michigan, to being with the Warriors, to where he is now. Like that can be his public identity. And I think that's fine because that expresses the amount of work that he's done. And like I said, we can have that being the priority. But I think subconsciously for internal development, I think there is benefit to having a more diverse side of things. And like I mentioned before, you can shape your identity around it. That's great. You can be all in about it. But I believe that you can be all in while having other things also on the side, right? I think that's what it comes down to me.
So this is interesting because I think, what you're saying there is that maybe a lot of athletes have that sort of public identity of this is who I am. This is I am an athlete, and this is I am dedicated, and I'm kind of driven. And maybe that's kind of why, we were talking earlier about coaches and parents buying into that as this is the only way forwards. Maybe it's because of some of those athletes that are publicly portraying themselves as like I am an athlete and this is all I have. Whereas in reality, in private, actually, they do have lots of other things going on. They like cats, for example.
I just want to get a little bit of credit for bringing an NBA example to this conversation. So Pete, please recognize I brought a basketball player into this.
I'll grant you that. I'll give you that one. Because Leah knows nothing about
I know next to nothing about basketball. Like every single sport that I've ever worked with, basketball, I've worked with basketball players and I know zero things about it.
I'm sure you've got about 15 hockey examples.
Oh, I've thought of all of them, and I've resisted with every fiber of my being from bringing it up.
I appreciate it.
I wish parents and the public media had an opportunity to hear draft combine interviews with players. Because if they heard that, they would hear the most absurd questions that have nothing to do with performance, everything to do with who the individual is outside of their sport.
Yeah.
Because even from an organizational level, that's the types of things they look for. Yes, do we know your public persona and your public identity of being an athlete? That's great. We can measure that. We can watch it. We can observe it. We can test it. We can do that, and that's fine. But from an organizational level, there's this major component that's put in this minor bucket of who is this person as an individual.
Yeah.
With Cortex, we have a coworker, Angel L. Durkin, who was a Division I basketball coach. And she talked about her recruiting process. It started with, how are you as an athlete? That's your public identity. That's who you are first, right? And then who are you as a student? Who are you as a person? Once they come on campus, it now shifts to who you are as a person, to a student, and then an athlete.
Hmm.
So there's this middle ground that doesn't get talked about because we talk about the athlete at the beginning that got you to college. Now the athlete at the end that gets you to that next level of being a pro. Those are the two sides that everyone cares about. But there's the student, the person, the student again, which is double the amount of being an athlete. So I think that public persona is vital. Do you need to be seen as the individual who puts in the extra work, who does the extra work, who watches extra film, cares about their craft, allowing that to be your identity? Sure. But there's still a component and a piece of that where we do have to still focus in on who we are outside of that, because there's going to be a lot more time outside of that than inside of that. So I think you can be all in to that mentality with still giving room to yourself of exploring the things outside of your sport, the things you're interested in, because at the end of the day, you have to be a person. And at some point, being an athlete's going to stop.
It's like what you said with your kid who is a big Venom fan, right? And it's like he brings out this like Venom persona, right, when he's performing and competing, but it's not like that really goes away when he's not on the, in his sport. It just kind of minimizes. And so like, how can we like bring out like this aspect of this person in this capacity? And they're all part of you, right? And I think we kind of forget sometimes about like, you still have to be a teammate. The person, like the coach is asking these questions or the combine are asking these questions. It's like, because they want you to be a good person who's going to be in their organization, right? And if you haven't developed those values and you haven't developed, those other components, it's like, are you going to be a part of the system, right? That is going to be a good fit.
I've seen players who were fantastic athletes who didn't go nowhere because they did not care about anything else. They had that all-in mentality of, I'm just going to be a really, really good athlete. And it's like, dang, why is this person not at a high level of Division I? Or why are they never got a chance to be a professional basketball player or a professional football player? It's because there's aspects outside of just performance that get taken into consideration, and that's not what's highlighted. So I think when we talk about education, awareness, having these types of conversations and getting them out to the public and the masses, that's what's important, because we have to see and learn. These coaches have to learn, because nowadays a lot of coaches kind of want to ride the tailcoats of that really good player. I'm going to put my all into this individual to help me get to where I want to get to.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a sad reality, right? So it's helping these younger kids really understand that there's always going to be a bigger picture outside of sports. And you have to feed into that. And it's not just something that naturally happens. And like Leah said, we can have that, but we have to learn how to minimize it and pull it out when we have control over
it. I'm really interested in, and Leah, you might have some thoughts on this as well here, about the influence of culture, maybe gender. Is there a gendered component to this as well, in perhaps the development of identity and the impact of that identity as well? I don't really have a question. I just sort of wanted to throw that out there as a topic and see if anybody had any thoughts on that. Because I'm thinking like Ilona Ma, who we've spoken about before, has talked a lot about her identity as an athlete. And she just kind of springs to mind as somebody that there is this sort of gendered component to athletic identity. And I just wondered what people's thoughts were on that.
I think with gender, I think a lot of times the stereotypes jump out of the type of persona that you need to have, right? When we talk about, if you close your eyes and think of what like this athlete from a male perspective looks like, you think of this jacked person that's working really hard, having all this passion and emotion behind it. When you do that for the other side, some people seem for that to be more off-putting. I'm not one of those. I agree with it. I love the energy that's behind it. I just saw this video of Sabrina Ionescu, who was in like a demonstration and like threw the ball at the person guarding her. But the reactions to that on Twitter in the comments were negative.
Mm-hmm.
because they're like, "Dang, chill. Why are you being like that?" But if the roles were reversed, it's almost like it's praised at times.
Yeah.
So I do think there's a challenge there. I'm not gonna say unfortunately, fortunately, I've had very little work with the and women population. So I don't really want to speak too much on just like how to particularly work with them in that sense. Leah, if you have more examples on how you've done that, potentially cool. But I do think when it comes to persona, like having that identity that works for you is best. And if we can find ways to pull out, just your strengths, whether it's through your emotion, through your passion, identifying who you are, how you want to be seen, I think that's kind of the route to go, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I have so many thoughts.
I mean, I thought you might. It's kind of why I threw it out there.
No, well, there's a couple things, right? I think that I think about a lot, and one of them is I have had some athletes who are women who really struggle with balancing their perceived femininity or their performative femininity.
Yeah.
That, there are certain sports, I come from gymnastics, which is like the most feminine, right? But then it's like in other sports, like, are you feminine enough? Are you too feminine? Are you whatever? Like, and, I think a lot about, I've had several conversations with athletes about, that whole struggle of like, how do they identify in that with their gender? But I've also been thinking a lot about emotions. And there was a recent interview with a male athlete who his best friend got traded, and he was giving this he was giving this like post practice interview, and he was like really, really affected. He was choking up and he was tearing up and he was crying, and everybody was like, "Oh, he's such heart and soul, and he's so emotional over this." And that was his best friend. And I was like, "Oh, so now it's cool to be emotional?" Great. And it's like, and not that I want to take that away from him, that emotion is like a huge part of his game, but it's like, but there are certain places and for certain athletes where that's looked at as a positive. And then there are a lot of athletes who are looked at as a negative. Right. And, to your point, Aaron, like I was thinking a lot about like Angel Reese and getting all like
thinking about her just now,
getting all hype, in the national championship and smack talking and, and particularly for her, that's super wrapped up, not just in gender, but also in her racial identity.
Yeah.
Right. And that it's like, I think it is really hard, particularly for minorities and minority athletes who have like multiple stacked identities, where how do they wrestle with these various identities and being an athlete at the same time when you have these different cultural backgrounds. And I do think places like Premier League soccer has gotten better at, there was a episode, I don't think it was like this year because Ramadan is really recent, but like, I guess it was last year, where they stopped a soccer match so that, one of the players could break his fast. Right. And they were really respectful of that, which Premier League is not always known to be, and so, finding ways in which that we can bring out these multiple identities and that how that brings value, right? Instead of trying to suppress those identities when you're in a position of leadership or a coach or an organization, to take advantage of those and to see those as strengths and not as, because so many sports are so hyper conformative, right? Where you can't deviate at all or you're going to go nowhere.
So from that sort of individual perspective, but also from this kind of organizational leadership perspective, there's a lot that we can be doing to allow athletes to express these kind of multiple aspects of their identities as well. And like you say, there's a lot of benefit to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you want like an interesting organization, that means you want interesting people. And that means that you're going to have different people, and that bring different perspectives. And And I do think from an organizational standpoint and from a coaching leadership standpoint, sometimes that can be difficult, right?
Yeah.
Because you want to balance all of those things. And, you know, when you have somebody who it doesn't quite fit that like mold, you know, how can we emphasize the fact that this is a thing that we value and this is a thing that we want to have in our in our group, in group dynamics.
And I think for me, what I've wrestled with just from media and seeing things is there's an education component of educating people on how to celebrate these cultural differences without trying to just simply normalize them and make everyone be attached to it. So like I just saw a recent example. There was a college basketball team where one of their players is, you know, fasting and stuff like that and had a really good performance. And I guess since Ramadan started, his performances have been really good. And after the game, the coach was just like, hey, because of the way you played, there's going to be a lot more people who are going to start fasting. And to me, I'm like, that's not what it's about, right? Like, you can celebrate and be like, man, during your fast, you're playing great. This is fantastic. But don't just try to take someone's culture and now just give it to everyone else saying that's the secret recipe to this.
That is the wildest appropriation that I've ever heard.
I promise you, like, this happened last night. Like, I believe it happened last night. So there's a component of educating, you know, front office people, organizational leaders, coaches, that we can celebrate individual differences without trying to normalize it and make it this now common practice amongst everyone. If that's some individual person's identity, let that be theirs. Let them own it. Let them be good with that and just accept it. You can implement it as much as you want. But I think the moment we start to just now normalize it for just everyone and saying, hey, everyone can do this because this is the result of it, I think it takes it away. To a way, it almost like not mocking it to an extent, but it's close to it almost. It's like you're not really appreciating it for what it is, just what it's doing for you. And I think there's a level to where we have to continue to push like the value of individual identity and how individual identities coming together can make a more cohesive unit, to make a better unit that brings that diverse aspect that allows for, you know, trust amongst one another. And like we talked about before, being a teammate, being a person, and allowing that to be the value rather than just simply what it is they're doing and when they're doing it.
This is the 80% Mental Podcast. I'm here with Leah Washington and Aren Ulmer, and our topic today is identity. If you've enjoyed the conversation, make sure you listen and subscribe to some of our other stuff on 80percentmental.com or at 80percentmental.com. You can follow us on Twitter at EPM Podcast or on Instagram at 80percentmental. Aren, I don't know if you've listened to any recent episodes of the podcast, but this is about the time where we sort of deviate a little bit from the topic at hand, and we've got to know you and your work, and your kind of take on identity, but we kind of want to know you as a person as well, which is kind of fitting given the nature of what we've been talking about. We want to kind of get to know the whole you, not just the mental performance consultant you. So we've got a little game that we like to play, where we get to know our guest a little bit better. Are you up for playing a little game?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So we've got 4 categories of questions, and I've got 4 virtual envelopes. Don't know who say that. And I'm going to get you to pick a number between 1 and 4, and that's going to tell us which of the categories you're going to get. So the categories are this or that, favorites and firsts, hypotheticals, and perspectives. So number between 1 and 4, and we'll see which one comes up.
2.
Okay. I'll shuffle my little virtual envelopes, and we've got this or that. So I'm going to ask you a series of quick fire questions. Leah, as always, join in if you will. And just your first answer, the first thing that pops into your head. So we'll start it off nice and easy. First question. Aren, drop a text or make a call?
Oof. Text.
Yeah, text for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say the same thing. I have like massive anxiety around making phone calls, so it's text every time.
For me, it depends with who, though. That's why I hesitated. I was like, some people it'll be a call, some people it'll be a text. So I think mass majority would be text.
Yeah, fair enough. Hot dog, ketchup or mustard?
Mustard.
Ketchup.
Yeah, I'll go ketchup as well.
Usually both, but if I'm choosing one, I would say mustard.
Yeah, that's the good. You have to choose one, I'm afraid. I would do both as well. Good book or a good podcast? Careful how you answer this one.
Podcast.
I'm really torn on this one. I have so many podcasts that I listen to, but I also have like my big stack of like unread books like staring at me.
Yeah.
Longing.
Keyword unread for mine. So podcasts are more versatile. Could listen to them in the car, in the gym. So I'll go with podcasts.
Yeah, that's it. I do love a book, but you're right. The versatility of the podcast, I think, is something to be celebrated. Winter or summer? You a winter person or a summer person?
Summer, yes.
No question.
Yeah.
I live in the South. I don't do cold.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
I do not do cold weather. I hate it. From California and then live in the South. Me and cold weather do not.
No, thank you.
So Montreal in October is going to be fun then, right?
It's only 4 or 5 days. Be on the first flight out Saturday. So.
Work in silence or work with music, background noise?
Music for sure.
I have to have music, but it can't have lyrics.
Same. I discovered this recently that like I didn't realize that I've always done it. Like when I was a kid, I used to do my homework and I used to put the television on. Like didn't watch it, just having some sort of noise in the background. I never realized that I did that before.
But if the song has lyrics, I will sing along to it, and then I won't be paying attention to what I'm reading at all.
I've recently explored, it's called like lo-fi hip-hop. And
big fan. Yeah.
I've recently explored it, and I've kind of like it. But again, it's to me, I can tune noise out really well. So even if it does have lyrics, like it's just there.
Yeah.
But I've started to kind of explore this kind of lo-fi kind of hip-hop type of thing, and it's been kind of cool.
Can I tell you, the Florida Panthers have a YouTube channel, and they did a thing right after they won the Stanley Cup where they put the Stanley Cup on a beach, and then they recorded it, and then they looped it so you can listen to an hour of beach sounds and waves, but also just looking at the Stanley Cup.
Kind of like that. I'm going to go check that out.
It's so good. My partner like walked in, I was like working, and he saw the TV, and he was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" He like walked right back
out. Quick flight or adventurous road trip?
Flight.
Yeah, a little quick flight.
I got to get to where I got to get to. I don't want to take too long. I've driven from California to Georgia before, and that was the only road trip I ever need in life.
That's a long one. Because I was going to say road trip, but I live in the UK, so like for you,
like what's your concept of a road trip? Let's start there.
Yeah, like 2-3 hours.
That's nothing.
It's like down the road for you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think anything over like 6 hours or so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Longer than 6 starts to get a little dicey for sure.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. Early riser or late sleeper?
Late sleeper.
Late sleep, late night.
Yeah.
I feel like we've given early morning people too much power. I don't like it.
See, because I get up really early, but I am a late sleeper. So I'm literally on automatic pilot for the first like 3 hours of the day. Like, I get stuff done. I have no idea how.
I did that for like a 7-month period where I was getting up at like 5 a.m. every day to go to the gym, but then have to do all my sessions. And then I was doing like coursework at the time. So I'd be going to bed at like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock to get up at 5. And if it wasn't for like Celsius and energy drinks, I don't know how I would make it to where I'm at now. So I was like, I'm just going to take out that early morning time. And yeah.
But because I don't know about you, Aaron, but when my daughter was born, my body clock just shifted about 3 hours earlier. So I just got used to being up at like 5-6 o'clock in the morning. I just thought, well, I'm awake. I might as well just get up and do stuff. So
that's when my early morning gym time started.
Right.
Was around the time when she was born. So I was like, I'm going to be up now. I might as well just go to the gym, come back, trade off.
Yeah.
But now that she's older, sleeps, and goes to daycare, I'm going to enjoy my sleep.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Last one. Last question then. NBA Finals or Super Bowl Sunday?
Come on now. I'm a basketball guy. Take me to the NBA Finals no matter what. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
Stanley Cup.
That's not an option.
Super Bowl Sunday, fine.
Okay. Well, I think, but when this goes, this should go out in late May, so we should be around conference finals time by then.
Yeah, that should be late May's heading right into finals right now. Yeah. Look at that appropriate timing.
Predictions. Let's get them on record. Predictions. Who's there?
This has probably been one of the most unpredictable years so far. Yeah, it's tough because there's obvious answers with the teams that are playing really well right now, like Cleveland and OKC, but I personally don't see either of them making it. Cleveland has a shot, so I'll say out of the East, I'm going to go with Cleveland. Out of the West, I'm sticking with my Golden State Warriors. We are 13-2 since the Jimmy Butler trade.
I know.
Turned it around, and Steph is going to go on his last hurrah, get that 5th finals championship ring. And
that would be something. I hope, because you're right, because Cleveland and OKC are the 2 best teams at the minute. No one wants to see a Cleveland OKC finals.
Not at all. Any smaller
no one wants that.
Possible.
No one wants that. It'd be terrible. All right, Aren, thank you so much. I feel like we've got to know you a little bit better now. Thank you for playing our Getting to Know You game.
No problem. I loved it. It was fun.
All right, so we are getting close to wrapping up. So I've got just a couple of questions left for you. Kind of moving back into this idea about identity. We've talked a little bit about this already, but I'm just wondering about that transition out of competitive sports, whether that is through deselection, whether that's kind of not making it to the next level, maybe it's injury, maybe it's retirement. There's lots of different stages where people might transition out of sport. And I just wonder how identity plays a role in that process. What are some of the maybe issues that you see around those transitions in and out of sport, and kind of how you might approach some of that as a performance consultant?
I would say it goes back to finding those strengths again. And it's not even so much your strengths as a performer. What are your strengths as a person? What are the things you like? What are your interests? How can you communicate that? How can you find similar compatibilities of what you did within your sport outside of your sport, right? I think there's a lot of roles and things out there that can play into, those strengths that we had as individuals, as performers. But again, this is why it's something that I work with athletes on way before we even reach that point. And I think that's why there's an importance of expanding your identity while performing. So we don't get to the end and now wondering, what do I like? What do I want to do? Who am I? Yeah. If we can figure that out beforehand, I think that's what's so important. I think the NBA has been doing a fantastic job within their player development spaces where they're allowing these athletes to get to ESPN, to see they like journalism, or all these different kind of components of it. So when their careers end, there's a more seamless transition there. They have a clear idea of what are the things that they like to do. Obviously, the very small percentage of players are making it to the NBA. So how does this work? What does this look like for players who are not in that capacity? And I think that's where our role can really step in, and how our role expands to almost be that player development side. And I think that's the essence of this holistic development, is understanding what their interests are inside and outside of sport, building their identity around being a person. And then once they've reached that transition point, if there's connections and resources and being that person that they can trust to help connect them to those spaces, I think that's invaluable services that we can offer within our space that fit within our ethics and our competency and our scopes and all of that. But I think it goes, like I said, back to those strengths, really identifying the things that they're interested in, the things that they enjoy to do, the things that bring them joy, and also letting them know that you don't have to find the answer right away. I think that's what's very important. A lot of individuals want to find the answer right away. And sometimes you don't need to. I have a presentation later this year. It's going to be about right when this comes out. Actually, it's that last week of May at the Black Student Athlete Summit. And we have a lecture that's already been accepted that is called like the final red shirt. And it's red shirting after your final collegiate season. So for those who aren't going to play pro, how can you use that next year to use that time to figure out who you are, to build that identity, to then be able to step into the next year with some assertiveness, understanding who you are, how you can maximize your potential in whatever space that might be, and then gain some progress and turn something out of that into a career, or whether it's retirement, whatever it is. But I think our work is done before we even reach that point, and that's something that we really should prioritize within our field.
And I think to your point, Aaron, that like leagues can do a lot better job of recognizing not just like preparing the athlete, but also recognizing that how they leave the sport is really important, right? That, you know, are they retiring because they were injured? Are they retiring because they've just like run their course and nobody wants to sign them anymore? Are they, you know, or do they get that fifth ring and they get to walk off into the sunset, you know, but how many people get to do that? 3, you know, right. That's what everybody wants to have happen, but that's not the norm. Right. And I think that is, you know, like, and the NHL just put out a statement that they partnered with Boston College, that any student who wants, for wherever they went to college, that they could finish their college degree,
That's cool.
Which is really awesome.
Yeah.
And to think about like, what is the context in which we are leaving the sport, and how is that going to shape our perception of that departure? And I think for us as consultants and for leagues or for universities to really think about like, how can we prepare for like all eventualities?
I mean, I think that's super important because context is everything. Like you said, some could be very abrupt, some get a farewell tour. But again, how rare is that? Injuries play a part in that. And that's why I really emphasize the point of, you know, the work being done before you reach that point. So you can be prepared for however that may end. So I think that's where the value lies in, you know, building all of these skills prior to getting to that point. I think it was JJ Redick when he was playing. He was like, a mental performance coach is ultimately what helped him retire, because he was going to try and keep pushing it. And he got to the point of having that conversation of like, maybe there's a side of this, and he wouldn't have transitioned as easily without someone in our field who did that work for him or helped him with that work. So I think that's where that value really lies. And whether we make it this immediate, whether it's your choice or not your choice, I think if we, with our help and the work that we do, there's balance in it. And then there's find ways to, you know, make it efficient no matter which route that you go.
I should point our listeners, if anyone's interested in kind of digging into this a little bit further, we did an episode last series with Dr. Kenza Gunter specifically on retirement or transitions out of sport. It's a really fascinating listen, and Kenza Gunter and Jamila Weidman, who both kind of work in the NBA, some really, really kind of insightful stuff in there about that. Aren, last word to you. From our conversation, we've been talking for over an hour. So what's one thing from our conversation that you would really want listeners to kind of take away with them? Like one thing that you think is just like so important around this topic that you really would kind of draw our listeners' attention to before we finish?
I think the biggest thing is understanding that it's okay to be yourself and being able to use who you are in any place, arena, conference, wherever you are in life, really, honestly, whatever sports you're in, being okay being yourself and not having to conform who you are and kind of and let your identity be impacted by what's going on around you. This world is big enough for all of us to genuinely be ourselves and be accepted in spaces for whoever you might be. There's always that saying, like, there's someone for everyone. Like, there's a space for everyone as well. So allowing your identity to be that outer persona, whether you like cats, Legos, cars, golf, and you're a different athlete, that's fine. I think finding ways to really just embrace and, be your true, unapologetic, authentic self, there's more value to that than trying to change whoever that is to fit a different arena or a different group of people, whatever that might be.
Awesome. I love that. And I think that's a beautiful way to bring things to a close. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, then don't forget to subscribe at 80percentmental.com. You can leave us a comment as well. What are your thoughts on the topic? Get in touch on Twitter at EPM Podcast or on Instagram at 80percentmental. And it just remains for me to thank Dr. Leah Washington for joining us as usual, co-host. Bestie, how you doing? So
good. Love this conversation so much.
And thank you so much to our guest, Aren Ulmer. Been a really, really fantastic conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed having you on the podcast. So thank you for giving us some of your time.
Most definitely. Like I said, it's an honor and a privilege to be on this podcast with the two of you. Love the conversation. Can't wait to have more conversation around this. And I'll see you guys in October.
Awesome. One final thing. If people want to get in touch, if people want to reach out, what's the best way for them to do that?
I think the best way is either by email or even DMing me on Instagram, simply at Aren Ulmer or Aren at cortexperformance.com. It's probably the easiest and fastest way to reach me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much once again. We'll put all of that in the episode description. So if you want to get in touch out there in listener land, you can do that. And that's it for this episode. We'll be back with more and we'll see you next time. Well, we won't see you though, because it's a podcast. Yeah.
That was a perfect ending. I love that.